Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our HMAA webinar on spices with Ian Hemphill. And Ian's on board here to talk to us about, well, I guess the subtitle says it all, doesn't it, Ian? The plants that change the world. So you're going to
Yes.
demystify spices,
Yeah.
talk about your journey with spices, your book about spices, and everything we need to know. So I'll hand it over to you. We're recording it, and we'll have
Okay.
questions at the end. So if people could just mute themselves as they have done. That would be fantastic. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Judy. Well, of course, a little bit challenge getting everything to do with spices into 1 hour. So I will power through it as quickly as I can. But I call it the plants that changed the world because they really did have an incredible effect upon very early trade, on voyages of discovery, on economics. The first corporation that was actually developed was the Dutch East India Company, first corporation in the world where people invested in shares, similar for the English East India Company. And that has really led on to what is very much still based in modern corporate law. So spices did have a very big effect. A lot of people were a lot more interested for fairly obvious reasons in things like gold and silver. And these were things that highly fluctuated, highly speculative. Spices, speculative to a degree, but they were something that there was always demand for, which actually did make some people wonder just why. And I think for a lot of us, we know that it's all about the amazing flavours that they give to foods. One of the things I always like to clarify at the beginning is just what are spices, because in my business, I'm always talking about herbs and spices. And as we all know, a herb is a herb plant. And from a culinary point of view, when we are using herbs in cooking, we are essentially using the leaf of the plant. So whether it's thyme, sage, marjoram, parsley, basil, bay leaves, we always call those herbs. But the interesting thing is that spices can come from any other part of a plant when they're used in cooking. So they could be the buds, they could be the bark, they could be the rhizomes, the rootlets, they could be the berries, they could be the seeds, and they can be other parts of plants. And if you think of the seeds, you can get seeds from a herb plant. So you have a coriander plant growing, and we call the leaves a herb. When we pick the seeds after the plant has flowered and gone to seed, we call coriander seed a spice. And that would apply to all of the seed spices, caraway seed, dill seed, aniseed, fennel seed, all those we still refer to as a spice. So very possibly one of the main misconceptions, I suppose, that we like to people to get over is that all spices are not hot. And I know there's lots of pictures of chilies drying on the ground behind me, and they are hot. But the majority of spices are not necessarily hot. They are all about flavor. And this is something that we're always trying to get people to understand is that when we use spices, we're adding flavor to food in many different ways. And the other wonderful thing is that spices are 100% natural. They should not ever need any fillers, any preservatives, anything like that if they are correctly produced. So everyone says, well, how do you know about quality? And of course, everybody in the world will tell you that whatever they're selling is the best quality. I've never had anyone come to me and say, oh, no, ours is not very good quality. It's nearly always a thing where I say it's in the eye of the beholder. Quality depends on what you're looking for. But the bottom line is that spices are agricultural commodities. And like any agricultural commodity that you purchase, the varieties that are being grown, the cultivars, the experience of the growers that are growing them. You buy spices from a country where they've been growing a particular spice for 5 or 6 centuries. They're probably going to do it a bit better than somewhere that's been doing it for the last 20 years. The soil and climatic conditions, of course, are terribly important in terms of what spice will thrive best in that environment. A very important area is the harvesting and the post-harvest handling and cleaning. The majority of spices are still harvested by hand. It's an amazing industry. People talk about coffee and tea. Coffee is one commodity. Admittedly, you get different cultivars of coffee or different types, but spices, there are well over 100 different spices. And so what you find is that it seems like a big industry, but it's still comprised of many small growers, small farms that collectively grow things and come into market. So the experience of those growers is very important. So all spices need post-harvest handling and cleaning. There'll be sticks and bits of stuff that come with them when they're harvested. Transportation, very important the way they're transported. Storage, how do you store your spices so you maintain their flavour so that they don't get affected by mould and things like that. And then, of course, spices are often further processed. Most common would be grinding. Now, grinding spices, you might think, oh, well, that's easy, grinding them's no problem. But of course, if you don't grind them in the right way, you may generate too much heat in the grinding process, and that could damage the flavour profile. So grinding is important. Blending is another thing. Making spice blends has become very popular. We make about 120 different spice blends now. But the whole point of a spice blend is it has to be beautifully balanced. Then, of course, how is that particular spice, when it's ready for consumers, packed? And then how is it distributed? How does it go out to shops and sold online or whatever? Now, all those elements will affect the quality of the spice you get. If you buy spice from a company that packs 20,000 bottles in one production run that then go out into a warehouse that probably gets to 40 degrees on summer days in Australia, and then has to go out to supermarkets and then sits on supermarket shelves, naturally, it may not be quite as fresh as something that has been packed and distributed in a much shorter supply chain. And so that brings me to storage, very basic. Keeping them in airtight packaging, very important to keep them airtight, to keep them away from extremes of heat, humidity and light. I always say to people, don't store them in the fridge or freezer. Some people like to when the weather's very hot. The main reason I say not to do that is that when you take them out, you will get condensation forming. Condensation will increase the water activity. Water activity makes volatile oils oxidize more rapidly. So if you have stored something in the fridge or freezer, take it out, wait till it comes to room temperature and all signs of condensation have disappeared, and then you can open the packet. It'll be fine. Your storage life is always a best before. It's never a use by, because when spices are properly dried and prepared, they will never go off. You find a spice in the back of the pantry that's 20 years old, it hasn't gone off. It is still okay from that point of view, but it's probably lost most of its flavour. So what will happen is over a period of time, the volatile oils will gradually deteriorate, losing the brighter, fresher top notes that are in that particular spice. So when the spice is whole, you've got whole star anise, cinnamon quills, peppercorns, whatever, they will be at their best before for about 3 years. They'll probably still be pretty good at 5 years, but best after about 3. The big thing to remember is, though, once a spice is ground into a general ground spice, a spice mix like a curry powder, you have broken up the cell structure in the plant. By doing that, the volatile oils can escape more rapidly, and your best before period will come back to somewhere between 12 to 18 months, depending on that particular spice. Now, one of the things I do like to talk about is the world's most expensive spice, and that is saffron. And a lot of you are probably familiar with saffron. Some of you probably even tried to grow it. And the interesting thing is that it comes from an autumn flowering crocus. And in each crocus, little purple flower you can see there are just 3 stigmas, stigma being the female organ of the plant. And these 3 stigmas are the saffron spice. The stamen, the little yellow piece that's there, has no commercial use at all. Now, because it's so expensive, has a street value in the vicinity of well over $20,000 a kilo. So it sounds terribly expensive, but it is. And of course, when anything's expensive, there's always a great incentive to adulterate. And over the centuries, there have been many rules with respect to adulteration. People have taken corn silk, coconut fibre, various other plant material, dyed it, coloured, tried to make it look like saffron. Back in the 12th century in Germany, they even had the saffron police, the Saffronescu. And if you were actually caught selling fake or adulterated saffron, you would be buried alive with your false material. So definitely was a very strong consumer protection law in those days. The most clever fake I have purchased recently in a number of countries, sold as pure Kashmiri saffron, is actually a fake material that is made out of a kind of gelatin substance. It doesn't smell like saffron. Saffron has a beautiful, fresh, light, aromatic, slightly woody note to it. I often refer to it as the Campari of spices because of its lovely dryness. The fake saffron tends to smell of sandalwood. The other thing you notice with saffron is the stigmas infuse very slowly into water. So you put, say, 12 stigmas into about a tablespoon of warm water, and you'll find it'll take 15 or 20 minutes for the beautiful golden color and flavor to infuse. If it's fake, generally the color will infuse instantly. So if you get saffron, color infuses instantly, first warning sign. Second one is with many of the fake saffrons, the color will be a sort of a dirty browny red color, not a beautiful golden yellow. And lastly, the little stigma, if you take it out of the water, rub it between your fingers, you will find that it will dissolve completely. So that's another telltale sign. The other thing to remember about saffron is you don't need to overuse it. It sounds horribly expensive, and you'll see the chefs on television putting a great big pinch into something because that's what the cameraman wanted to see. Reality, you only need about 12 stigmas to colour and flavour a cup of rice. So they are actually quite economical when you use them the right way. If you've ever been to Spain, just south of Toledo, there's a little village called Consuegra on the plains of La Mancha. And in the end of October every year, they have a saffron festival. And believe it or not, that the one we went to, they made a giant paella. And so there you can see this huge paella that they've put all the traditional ingredients in. The guy there at the moment with the bucket, he's just about to tip in a bucket of snails. And it was really quite amazing. And then I saw them pouring a red liquid in. And I said to them, "Oh, what's that you're putting in?" "Oh, it's red colouring." I said, "Oh, but why aren't you using saffron? It's a saffron festival." And they said, "Oh, it's too expensive." So I thought that was a little bit funny. Now, there are a few spices that we're not overly familiar with, but are very important to us. And one that you may or may not have heard of is annatto, sometimes called achiote. And this is a fascinating plant. That is what the pod looks like. And it is often used in Mexican cooking, very common in Mexican food. And it's also used in the Philippines. But what's interesting about this little pod is that when it breaks open, these are the seeds that you have inside. These are some pictures I took in Zanzibar some years ago, actually. Now, you can't really see it on the seeds, but they have a slightly sticky red, slightly jelly-like substance on them. And the native people would take that and use it to give themselves lipstick. And for that reason, it was often referred to as the lipstick tree. But these days, with the move towards using more natural colours and flavours instead of artificial colouring, you will start to notice on a lot of food products that have got added colouring, it will often say annatto. So you look at a tub of margarine now, and so other products, you'll often see annatto, and that is a natural red colouring, which you'll see, quite commonly. So there's a spice. It is used for flavour to a certain degree. It's got a slight bitterness. If you're in Mexico, you'll notice that all the chickens being sold in the supermarket are a lovely yellow colour. That's to give the impression that they are corn-fed. The reality is they're actually coloured with annatto to make them look like beautiful corn-fed chickens. Cinnamon and cassia are worth talking about, mainly because they are both beautiful spices, but they are quite different. And a lot of people don't know about the difference between the two. The first one is the Sri Lankan cinnamon, the Cinnamomum zeylanicum. So this is the one that is native to Sri Lanka. And it is the one that was almost always the most common cinnamon sold in Australia and the UK. However, there is another cinnamon cassia which comes from southern China, Vietnam, and the Indonesian archipelago. And these are the Cinnamomum cassia, the Cinnamomum luerii, and the Cinnamomum burmannii. Now, these do have a different flavour to the Sri Lankan cinnamon. What's interesting is that the cassia has been given names such as baker's cinnamon, Bastard cinnamon and false cinnamon are names that I think were dreamt up by the Sri Lankans who saw it as a competitor. And then, of course, Dutch cinnamon, because the Dutch took a lot of cassia back to Europe when they were running Indonesia. And so that's often referred, that's why it's often called Batavia cassia or Dutch cinnamon. Now, what makes these trees different? Well, first of all, the cinnamon tree looks like this. If you look at the bottom of the tree here, you'll see this is being coppiced to give you these lengths of growth that are harvested each year. This is a tree that we actually have growing up on the north end of the Central Coast. It probably likes the humidity we're getting at the moment, but it generally is not all that wrapped in our climatic conditions. But something that's worth mentioning when we talk about cinnamon is that the leaves, the Indians call tejpat, which is actually the Indian bay leaf. So if you're ever cooking an Indian recipe and it says add a bay leaf, you do not add a European Laurus nobilis bay leaf because it'll be the wrong flavour. What you need to do is add a leaf of the cinnamon tree or just leave it out if you can't get it. The next stage is after harvesting the cinnamon, they peel the underneath layer of bark. So the agissa, the very paper-thin layer, is carefully peeled off after stripping off the corky outer bark. A lot of you may remember many years ago, you could buy a very cheap little canister of ground cinnamon, and it was quite a dark brown, quite coarse powder. And that was the outer layer of bark. That's not sold very much now as cinnamon. Most of the time it's used to make cinnamon bark oil by steam distillation, and that cinnamon bark oil is used in confectionery and soft drinks, etc. So after peeling these very, very thin pieces of cinnamon, they then make them into 1 metre long cinnamon quills. So the guy on the left here is making these 1 metre long cinnamon quills from all those little pieces of bark. And they will telescope them together. Some of the broken bits might be put down into the middle of the quill, but every single good quality cinnamon quill is made originally in 1 metre lengths and then baled up. Now, dried, of course, first and then baled up. Now, you can always tell true Sri Lankan cinnamon quills because when you look at them in cross section, if you look at the end here, you will notice that it looks like a cigar. It's made of a scroll of many concentric layers. So the true cinnamon will always look like that. And that's the easiest way to tell a genuine Sri Lankan cinnamon quill. Tell you all about the flavour importance in a minute when I've gone through the cassia. Now the cassia, this photo I took in north of Hanoi in Vietnam, and with cassia, they generally take it from the whole tree. Tree will be cut down. This tree will be cut down and it's about 9 years old. And they will then strip the bark from the whole tree. So it'll be taken from the trunk, the branches, the upper branches, the smaller branches. So you will see cassia in all different shapes and sizes. And you'll even very often see in a shop a little bag of cinnamon bark. And it's all these chunks and pieces. Well, it's not cinnamon bark, it's cassia bark, right? Which is different. So that's what really makes the cassia different. And when we look at the way cassia is sold, if you look at a cassia quill or a piece of cassia bark, which is one of the most common ways it's sold, you'll notice that it's not a single scroll, like a cigar. You'll notice it's a single scroll. You'll notice the bark's thicker and it looks quite different. Now, what's the main difference? The Sri Lankan cinnamon has a very mild, delicate cinnamon flavour. This is the cinnamon that you would mix with sugar to put on a sponge cake. If you were poaching pears in champagne to have for breakfast, which I think I might do this coming Sunday morning, you would use the Sri Lankan cinnamon because of its delicate flavour profile. So this Sri Lankan cinnamon, you'd put a quill in while it's cooking, the flavour would infuse and you will get a lovely flavour. If, however, I was making an Asian dish, a Chinese dish, maybe with star anise, Sichuan pepper, other strong flavors, then I would tend to use the cassia. If I was doing a compote of fruit with, dried fruit, and you're doing a compote with dried fruit, and you want lots of depth of flavour, you would tend to use the cassia. Cassia is often called baker's cinnamon because it is preferred by bakers, partly because it's stronger and a bit cheaper, and also it withstands the heat of baking very well. So when something is baked, the cassia will hold its flavour a little bit better than the Sri Lankan cinnamon. They're both fabulous spices. They're really good. And we use them both. And in some spice blends, I will even blend the two together because they can work very nicely together. Now, I wonder if many of you have heard of mastic. You've probably heard the word mastichon, which is Greek for to chew, and of course, mastication. So this actually is the original chewing gum. Now, what's interesting, this is harvested from a tree, comes from the Greek island of Chios, which is over on the east coast of Greece, very, very close to Turkey, actually. And these trees, they're a member of the pistachio family. Pistachio lentiscus is its botanical name. These trees are tapped, but not like a rubber tree. So the rubber tree, they cut down to get the rubber oozing out, the latex oozing out. With a mastic tree, they only slightly score the outer bark. And this is actually referred to as hurting. So after they've hurt the tree, these droplets, these saps of mastic will come out, and then they are referred to as mastic tears. And so that's how you always buy them. So why would we use mastic? Well, mastic has a very delicate pine-like flavour. You can be used as a chewing gum. It's the world's first chewing gum. And funnily enough, it keeps its flavour for a lot longer than a modern flavoured chewing gum. But the other thing is it is used to add texture, softness and texture to many foods, most commonly to ice cream. So if you get any of those really beautiful Greek or Turkish ice creams that have got a really smooth mouthfeel, beautiful profile that way, that's coming from mastic. And if you happen to be lucky enough to visit the Greek island of Chios, you can always go to a lovely bar and you can get some beautiful mastic drinks. So even a mastic mojito. So it's amazing that, the other thing mastic is often used for too is in the varnish on musical instruments. Has been used for a long time to make part of the varnish on a musical instrument. Nutmeg. Now, nutmeg comes from the Indonesian archipelago. These are the amazing spice islands, which all of the adventurers were trying to get to. It was where the clove and nutmeg trade was so important, because the thing that I still find quite amazing is to think these trees only grew on a couple of islands in the Indonesian archipelago. What's referred to as Ambon in that Banda Sea, the only place in the whole world. So you can imagine how important it was to get there, to try and monopolise the trade once you got there. Now, the great thing about a nutmeg is that it gives us two spices. The fruit itself looks a little bit like a nectarine, does not have a lot of commercial use, and has quite a bitter, tangy sort of flavour. It's almost a little bit like green mango, but a bit sharper. When the nutmeg is cut open, you will see a bright red filament covering the nutmeg, and that is the spice we call mace. And the mace is peeled off, put in the sun to dry. It will gradually go dark red to brown. The nutmeg inside will also be put out in the sun. It's in a hard, brittle shell. When you can pick these shells up and shake them and hear the nutmeg rattling inside, you know you're ready to crack the shell open, and then that's the nutmeg inside that you get to use in cooking. The flavour profile is quite different between the two. There are some similarities, but as a very basic rule of thumb, the nutmeg tends to be used primarily in sweet cooking, cakes, biscuits, mixed spice, all that sort of thing, although you will find nutmeg going very well with root vegetables and things like spinach. Mace, however, will tend to be used primarily in savoury cooking. It also goes well with spinach and root vegetables, but you'll also find mace is very good with fish and shellfish. So very often when fish are being gently poached or whatever, some pieces of mace will go in. And mace is generally sold in its whole form. You get these whole pieces, and they are referred to as blades of mace. So a recipe, instead of saying to add half a teaspoon of mace, it will say to add a blade of mace. Which I suppose brings me to also just mention the difference between adding a whole spice and a ground spice to whatever it is that you're cooking. Because we add a whole spice when we want to infuse the flavour into the dish, getting back to my cinnamon with the poached pears, but we use a ground spice when we want it to mix with the other ingredients. Classic example of using whole spices to flavour something is you look at a jar of dill pickles. The liquid is nice and clear, but in the bottom you can see the mustard seeds and the little bits of bay leaf and maybe some fennel seeds and other ingredients, but the liquid's clear. So that's when you're infusing using the whole spice. But if you're making a curry or making a tagine, or you're wanting to rub a spice onto a piece of meat you're barbecuing or anything like that, then of course you use a ground spice, because the ground spice will easily coat, it will mix with the other ingredients. But in some dishes, you wouldn't want the ground spice just giving whatever you're cooking a muddy appearance. The other amazing one from the Indonesian archipelago is cloves. The clove is a tree which only grew on two islands right up near the equator in that Banda Island group, two little islands called Tidore and Ternate. And the clove bud, you will notice, is connected to the tree by a little stem. Now, the clove spice is just simply the unopened flower bud that is harvested. Sometimes the stem is harvested as well. Now, if the stem is dried and used to adulterate cloves, the stem only contains about 20% of the volatile oil that you get in a clove. And like many spices, the cloves are put out in the sun to dry. Now, what happens with a lot of spices? They contain compounds inside which are activated by the heat of the sun. And when these are activated, they change the color of the spice. But what they also do, they create the volatile oils that give the spice its flavor. So when cloves are dried, what happens is you get the volatile oil eugenol being created. Eugenol is a very strong natural anesthetic and antiseptic. And that's why when a lot of people smell cloves, the first thing they think of is the dentist, because of the fact that dentists used to use oil of cloves. I think some still do actually, because of its antiseptic and anesthetic properties. And of course, cloves are used widely in cooking, very strong flavor profile. You don't need to use a lot of them, but they're a classic example as how it is the naturally occurring enzymes in the cloves that create the flavour. And of course, this is all very much part of why the spice trades had this amazing industry. Because once the spice is properly dried in this way, it can then be transported. And these cloves, going back for centuries from Indonesia, would have travelled probably by canoe up into China. They would have then gone along the various Silk Roads. They would have ended up in various parts of the Levant. Clove buds have been found in an archaeological dig of a kitchen in Syria that goes back to, I think it's around about 2000 BC. How did they get there? The only thing I can think is that by the time they got there, they may not have had a lot of flavour. So it would have been a very long journey. Now, one of the truly fascinating ones, probably the next most expensive spice after saffron, is of course vanilla. And vanilla is a tropical climbing orchid. It is native to Mexico and was not grown outside of Mexico commercially until less than 2 centuries ago. And the reason for that is that the vanilla orchid can only be pollinated naturally by a native bee of the Melipona species. This bee is just about extinct. The vanilla people we know in Mexico are actually trying to breed up a colony of these native bees, but at the moment, Every single vanilla crop has to be hand pollinated to touch the stigma and stamen together to get the vanilla beans forming. After fertilization, the vanilla beans form as pods like this, and at this level, they have absolutely no flavor and no aroma at all, completely odorless and tasteless. They are then lightly heated and then put out on blankets in the sunshine, where they will absorb the heat of the sun during the day. That is activating the enzyme and is gradually turning the beans from green to brown to eventually black. They're out in the sun during the day. At night, they are gathered up, wrapped up in their blankets, and they are put to bed for the night on curing racks in the shed that you can see at the back there, where they will sweat during the tropical evening. The beans are then taken and put back out in the sun again. That night, they're put to bed again. The next day, they're taken and put back out in the sun again. That night, they're put to bed again. This process can go on for up to 28 days. And the head vanilla curer will have to monitor the progress of the beans very carefully, because if the beans are cured too rapidly, you won't get optimum vanillin flavour development. And if they're cured too slowly, you will have too much retained water activity and the vanilla beans could go mouldy. So it is still very much an art. And while there have been some fairly good efforts to try and produce vanilla under controlled temperature and humidity and air pressure conditions, they have really not been able to achieve the same sort of quality you get from a naturally cured vanilla bean. And of course, the vanilla beans, when harvested, they'll have different levels of moisture content, they'll be different sizes, different shapes, all that sort of thing. And so you will find that it is very labour intensive from really all stages, right through, from pollination through to getting the final vanilla bean. And that's one of the reasons why vanilla is so expensive. But again, it is a wonderful spice that often frustrates me a little bit when you hear people saying about something, oh yeah, look, it's really just plain, it's just vanilla. And I think, well, hang on, that's a little bit of a put down for what I believe is one of nature's very special spices. Now, of course, pepper. Pepper has been the world's most traded spice. Comes from a tropical climbing vine that is native to the south of India, the Piper nigrum vine. The peppercorns are, to my knowledge, all over the world, still mostly harvested by hand. Pepper, too, is one of the spices that was probably the first to be grown outside of its country of origin. Growing outside of country of origin was often an issue because of A, climatic conditions, B, the soil, whatever, but often, most importantly, natural pollinators. Now, the interesting thing about the pepper vine is that when the flower forms, on the left you can see the spike, which has the flower. When that forms, it is a hermaphrodite flower. So what happens during the monsoon, the water running down the spike fertilizes it, and then the berries form, as you can see on the right. And they originally form as a green berry, and then if they're left on the vine, they will gradually go from green to yellow to pink. So that's how the pepper is created. It's interesting that this was one of the first plants to be grown out of its country of origin about 100 AD. The Arabs starting to take pepper vines to other tropical countries. And that's why you'll find pepper growing in many tropical countries now around the world. And Malaysia and Indonesia are some of the world's biggest producers, and even sometimes outsource India. Now, again, the old magic happens with spice. The outer skin of the peppercorn, the bit we call the pericarp, that the enzymes in that are activated when they are put out on mats in the sun, and the drying creates the oils that give black pepper its characteristic flavour. So next time you've got a pepper grinder and you freshly grind some pepper, have a good sniff, smell it, and think of the oiliness that is in that aroma. That's where the black pepper flavour is coming from. Now, in the heart of the peppercorn, we have piperin. That's what gives pepper its heat. White pepper is made by taking green peppercorns. So you can see the mat at the very furthest end, that's a green peppercorn. They're the ones that are only used to create black pepper. But the pink peppercorns, these ones here, which are ripening, those are taken, put into calico sacks, immersed in water for about a week. Process is called retting. They're then taken out of the water, macerated to rub off the outer skin, remember, that contained the pericarp, and then they're dried. And that's white peppercorn. White pepper is just basically the heart of the peppercorn. White pepper tastes different to black pepper, and that's why it is used. And of course, a lot of chefs use white pepper because they don't want black specks in their white sauces. But now it's often more a matter of the flavour preference for white rather than the heat. There are some other interesting types of pepper too. There's this rather cute one, which is called cubeb pepper, has the creative botanical name of Piper cubaeba, and it is sometimes called tailed pepper. And you'll notice this berry has got a little spike, like a little tail on it. Centuries ago, it was banned as an illegal pepper. And the reason for that was people used it to adulterate real pepper. And that's why it was banned by various authorities. So if you were caught trying to flog off cubeb pepper in the Venice spice market, you would be in big trouble. But cubeb pepper, interesting thing about it is it's a little bit peppery. It also has a pine-like note that is not unlike juniper. And that's why when you look at your bottle of Bombay Sapphire gin, which I'm sure some of you may peruse from time to time, you will notice that inscribed on the side are little images, little etchings of the different botanicals that go into the gin. One of those will be cubebs, along with grains of paradise and other things. But so because of its junipery type note, it goes very well in gin manufacturing. And we actually do sell cubeb pepper to some gin manufacturers in Australia. Another pepper worthy of mention, which again is not really a true pepper, but that is Sichuan pepper from the Piperetum zanloxatum plant, otherwise known as prickly ash, and you can see it is very prickly. The interesting thing to note about Sichuan pepper is that it is the burst open seed pod that we use as a culinary spice. You will sometimes notice little black seeds in Sichuan pepper. Never use those. They are tasteless and they will make your food taste gritty. So with Sichuan pepper, it is just this burst open seed pod. This has a very tangy, biting sort of heat, very different heat to chili and pepper, very numbing, very tangy, and is the classic pepper that is used, of course, in salt and pepper squid. And it does frustrate me when restaurants make salt and pepper squid just with salt and ordinary black pepper, and they don't use Sichuan pepper, which doesn't really work nearly as well. So would be good if they did that. One of my favourite spices, cardamom. Member of the ginger family. You'll notice it gets this very delicate little flower at the base of the plant, right down at the base. And it has tiny little red veins through it. Then the cardamom pods form as these little capsules on the plant. They are harvested, and they are one of the few spices dried in the dark. And the reason they're dried in the dark is that green cardamom tends to be judged very much on its quality by the greenness of it. So if you see cardamom pods that are sort of pale yellow, you can guess that they were not dried in the dark, and they won't have quite as good a flavour as the ones that have been carefully dried. When you break them open, the little seeds inside are white, and then after drying, they turn dark brown and black. And cardamom has a lovely eucalypt type flavour profile. There's another cardamom which a lot of people find is a little bit weird, which is a black or brown cardamom, used a lot in Indian cooking. The interesting thing about this plant is that the crown of the plant is actually dug up, and that is what gives us the brown cardamom pods. Now, they have a very smoky note, and brown cardamom you'll really only tend to find in Indian cooking. But if you don't have a luxury of a tandoor in your back garden and you want your butter chicken to get a lovely smoky note, a few brown cardamom pods put in there will work beautifully. And that's what they look like. You'll see they've got a little membrane running along them. We have friends with Indian restaurants who've told us they'll always count the number of these they've put into dishes and then take them out before they serve them, because it has not been unusual for someone to see a cardamom pod in their curry and think that they have got a cockroach in their curry. So they have to be very careful about that. I must just add that in Zanzibar, Liz did get a cockroach in her curry, but luckily it was a whole one. I mentioned grains of paradise, another member of the cardamom family. Very interesting seeds, these. They're a little bit cardamom-like, but they're also peppery. Grains of paradise are often referred to as melegueta pepper. And again, one of the spices you will see on the bottle of Bombay gin because they are used in gin manufacturing. The catch is these plants are not really commercially cultivated. At the moment, most of them are wild harvested, which is a problem because what's happening now is the world is developing and people are getting demand for various things like this. The greater the rates of wild harvesting, the greater the chance of further propagation of a lot of crops is happening, and some things are starting to become fairly difficult to get. And I won't even begin to tell you about the challenges we have of getting this in through biosecurity. They're very determined that it won't become a weed in Australia. Chilies, just cast your minds back 500 years and just imagine that there was not a single chili used in Indian cooking, not a single chili used in Thai cuisine, not a single chili used in China, and no paprika in Hungary or Spain. And that's simply because Columbus was looking for the Indonesian archipelago when he decided to sail west instead of going east the way most people did. Sadly for Columbus, he bumped into the Americas and he didn't find anything of any value. All he found were chilies, chocolate, tobacco, tomatoes, potatoes, of no commercial use whatsoever. Anyway, of course, the rest is history. The big appeal with chilies is that they contain a substance called capsaicin, which gives them heat, and it's a great substitute for pepper. So what actually happened for the first time in history, no matter what socioeconomic group you came from, you could get a spicy, flavorful hit from chilies, an easily grown, prolific plant, which became extremely popular. Paprika is just simply another chili. So paprika and chilies closely related. Most of the chili varieties are capsicum annuum, and you will find that the flavor profile of paprika is almost identical to chili. So chili is also about flavor as well as heat. And very often when we're using chilies, we're using them for their flavor as well as their heat. And then we have our own Australian native plants. And of course, lemon myrtle, it's got to be everyone's favorite because it's so easy to use. I haven't used lemongrass for years. I just far prefer lemon myrtle. Both the fresh lemon myrtle leaves in a dish instead of fresh lemongrass, and also the dried lemon myrtle powder in cooking. We have a couple of lemon myrtle trees growing at home, and they're just wonderful tree to have. Look beautiful, and of course, great to use in cooking. There's also the Australian native bush tomato, the Solanum centrale. This plant grows in central Australia, and there are always horrible supply issues. Another one of the plants that is primarily wild harvested. Various farmers have found it very difficult to domesticate. It's probably got that typical Australian characteristic of you don't want to be told what to do, and I'll decide where I'm going to grow, because bush tomato has been a real challenge, but it's often referred to as desert raisin. It actually generally dries on the bush. So when it's harvested, it's already dry, and it has a beautiful caramel-like flavor profile. And we certainly hope in the spice industry that someone will eventually be able to cultivate these commercially so that they become more readily available. As I said, it's often called desert raisin. Native word for it is kudgera or kutchera, and you can see what the little berries look like. But they have a slight bitterness to them, but they do have a beautiful flavor profile. Just briefly on my mission in terms of inspiring people about herbs and spices. My first book was called Spice Notes, was published by Pan Macmillan in Australia in 2000. And it was a winner of a best hardcover book that year. And in it, what I really wanted to do was convey as much information as I could, but not get too technical. Enough technical stuff so that you knew where you were coming from, but also, and it included only a couple of recipes, didn't have very many recipes. Then the same book was published in America, and our Canadian publisher, sorry, Canada, our Canadian publisher wanted to call it the Spice and Herb Bible. And I said, well, you can't do that. There's only one Bible. And he said, well, look, I'm sorry, but there's the cake decorator's Bible, there's the woodworker's Bible, etc., etc. So anyway, he's the publisher, he's the one investing in the book. And so he did an edition of this. And our daughter, Kate, contributed recipes to this, which was wonderful. Kate, our eldest daughter, lives in London. She trained as a chef at Pruley School of Food and Wine, and she still does a lot of work for us. And so she did recipes for this book, and also my current book, The Spice and Herb Bible, third edition, which has recipes from Kate. It's been expanded to 800 pages, and it is a book which is still selling very well in Canada and the US. Now, what's given me great pleasure is that Kate and I have just launched How to Add Flavour. And yes, flavour is spelt in the North American way. And that's because it's a Canadian publisher. This book is sold in Canada, North America, the UK, and Australia. In this book, we only cover 15 different herbs and spices, plus salt and pepper. What we want to do is give beginners a way to get into using herbs and spices to make good, natural food taste fantastic. The big problem for a lot of people is they think, A, using herbs and spices is going to be complicated. Secondly, they're told by their dietitian they've got to cut down on salt and fat and artificial ingredients and ultra-processed foods, and they think, oh dear, that means my meals are going to be boring. And so what we wanted to do was demystify them in a way that would be accessible. We reckon with this book, if you can read, you can cook. It's as simple as that. And then, of course, there's our Herbie's website, which has lots of information on it. People can search the website. Up at the top there, there's a search area. Down at the bottom, you'll see there's a little bit where we say products that do not include. That means that if you are gluten intolerant, you can click the gluten square, and then all the products show will not contain gluten. And of course, you can do a contact us and ask us any questions at all that you like. So hopefully that will give you a little bit more insight into this world of wonderful natural flavours that has got me totally obsessed for most of my lifetime. Thank you.
Oh, Ian, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I'll give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Now, I
Thank
wonder if
you.
anyone's got questions to ask, apart from the fact that my mouth is watering at just the thought of all those wonderful. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned your new book, because that's
Yes.
really something that people can look out for.
Yes, it is, because a lot of people really still, and what I find funny is the number of people who will say, oh, look, I'd like to use more spices, but I'm not a very good cook. And I say, oh dear, have you ever grilled anything? Have you ever boiled an egg? Have you ever put something on the barbecue? Have you ever made a stir fry? Have you ever made a casserole? Like, people have done all those things. It's only about adding spice. But what I find really funny is my wife, Liz, is a brilliant cook. Kate is an excellent, wonderful cook. I'm not a good cook. Technically, I am so basic, it's almost embarrassing. But when I cook something, people say to me, gee, Herbie, you're a good cook. And it's simply because what I've cooked tastes good. There's no complex technique in it or anything like that. And I think that's what people need to understand. It's really all about flavour. Yeah, yeah. So no questions?
Yes,
Well,
I'm just looking to see, just unmute yourselves and ask a question if you've got a question to ask.
My first question, Ian, is did Kate get married?
Yes, Kate has a wonderful. That's
Ah.
why she's still in England.
And that's why she's now Macintosh and
Well,
not.
that's why
Yes,
she's
that's
now
what I just
Macintosh.
noticed.
So her husband is a wonderful Scotsman from Edinburgh,
Uh-huh.
which is one of my favourite cities in the world. I love visiting there, but they live in London and they have two children.
So
And the
you've lost
wonderful
them.
thing about Kate was her kids, our grandkids, first solids had spices in them.
Oh.
Not hot spices, not hot ones, but I think Maisie's first solids had a little bit of Ras El Hanout, which is a Moroccan blend. And both of Kate's kids, when they still had nappies on, she would have them standing at the kitchen bench doing things with food.
Mm.
And they are so capable when it comes to preparing, not only preparing food for themselves, but they're not fussy eaters. They understand food, you know? So they've been very lucky. And so the lovely thing about this book too is that Kate has been cooking for over 20 years for a family. And so she understands what works and what people like. So that's been really wonderful. And for Liz and I, it's just fabulous to see that. And Kate does classes in London. She does talks and she does some food consultancy for some people. And so she is really carrying on third generation because she remembers playing in her grandmother's herb garden. A lot of you would remember Somerset Cottage at Dural, where I grew up. And that's why I got the nickname Herbie, of course. When I was at school, my school friends thought it was pretty weird having a family that was selling legal herbs. And so they gave me the nickname of Herbie, which stuck with me for the rest of my life. But yeah, Kate remembers playing in her grandmother's herb garden and remembers even at the age of sort of around about 6 or 7, she would help Granny and give customers change because she loved the till. Uh, so, yeah, it's been very much a fortunate family history for us, and it's lovely to see it continuing with Kate.
Well, that's lovely, Ian.
Yeah,
Anyone got other questions other than Judy's snooping?
I do have some more. I have a couple of other
Yeah,
questions. Can
yeah,
I? Yeah, I'm
go
sorry
for
to
it.
go for it. Okay. One is you mentioned the lemon myrtle. I know
yeah,
there were lots of fears about its production being affected by myrtle rust. Do you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, that was quite an issue, but they seem to have overcome that. I think any areas where it did appear were isolated, and as far as I know, it is no longer an issue for lemon myrtle producers. But yes, there was quite a bit of concern about that, but that's as far as I know now, quite under control. Yep,
Okay, my other question, I promise I'll shut up after that, is
that's right.
the desert tomato that you mentioned, the
Yes.
solanum.
Yeah.
Has anything ever been work ever been done with the one that I have growing all over my place called the that's called kangaroo apple? I think it's a viculare or something of the solanum. You don't know anything about. I should try,
No.
shouldn't I?
That you've got me there. Good on you, Judy.
Oh,
I will claim get use my get out of jail free card to say I don't know if it be used as a spice.
no. Okay.
Look, there are a lot of native foods that people are becoming aware of, and one of the issues really for a lot of them is availability. It happens with wattle seed. And see, the thing about bush tomato was where it was growing in Central Australia, of course, the seeds needed a fire to go over them to germinate. And then once germinated, and the plant would then produce fruit for probably anywhere between 4 to 6 years. But then way back, the first Australians were prevented from doing a lot of the burning that they did. So what was then happening was that in these areas you weren't getting the regeneration as well. So it's almost been a bit of a double hit that bush tomatoes been hit with. Um, and our only source of supply is someone who brings it into Alice Springs. But as I say, in very short supply. But there's a lot more information coming out, Judy, about all those other Australian native fruits. And again, Yeah, it sounds like what you're growing is readily available. So it'd be interesting to know how edible it is. But that is
My
the other
husband
thing.
calls it that weed, but I know it's native, but apparently
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
it's
Well, that's
a
the other interesting thing, of course, as you probably know, you talk about something like wattle seed. What is it? There are 2,000 species of acacia. I think there's probably less than 100 that are edible. The rest have different levels of toxicity. So I often say to people too, when it comes to native plants, you need to have an expert with you before you trot out into the bush and start eating things you can see.
thanks, Ian.
Yeah, yeah.
It's certainly right about the kangaroo apple, Judy. It's toxic unless it's orange, ripened. I'm sure you know that.
Oh, okay.
When I've
And of course, some things are toxic until they're cooked. So you get candle
Yeah.
nut, which is used a lot in Asian cooking. Candle nut, if you eat a raw candle nut, looks very like a macadamia. If you eat a raw candle nut, it will make you sick. If you've cooked it, you will kill the alkaloid that's in it, and it'll be perfectly safe to eat. And it's used a lot in Asian cooking. So yeah, that happens quite a lot with plants.
yeah.
Mm.
That's all fascinating. Any other questions while we've got Ian? Because we're going to wrap it up in a sec.
Okay. Well, I suppose the main thing in finishing off, please
Yep.
don't hesitate to contact us. If you go to the website, you can contact us there. And the other thing is that at the bottom of the page, there's a little section that says join the inner circle. If you put in your name and email address, you won't receive emails from us every other day or week. You will only receive a communication probably once a month, and that will generally be an update, it'll be recipes, it'll be general information. So you can quite safely subscribe to that without being pestered. And as I said earlier, please, any questions at all, there's a contact us there. You can always send us an email and ask us any spice or herb related questions you have.
Yes, and Karen's already on the website looking for Christmas, doing a bit of Christmas shopping. So that's a
Excellent.
good
Congratulations.
thing. And there's quite a few people saying thank you for the terrific webinar, Ian. So and I would think we'd all agree. So
Okay.
and Jackie's saying I bought the Spice Notes book years ago, and it is a wonderful resource. So
Thank you. Thank you,
lots of
Jackie.
thumbs up there.
Okay.
All
Good.
right.
Wonderful.
Okay, everyone have a great Christmas. Happy
Thank
New
Thank you,
Year.
Ian. Thank you.
You
Okay.
too.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye
Thank
for
you
now.
very much.
Bye.
Well, that concludes the webinar.